Okay, I'm going to stop you. I know some of you haven't finished, but I'm still going to stop you anyway, all right? Because I want to move on. I think we've probably got a sense of what that was about. So you've been being learners for a bit. Now put on your teacher hats and tell me, just talk about that activity in terms of a language learning activity. Tell me why, what the point of it is, what it does. Maybe use a bit of terminology, talk about some issues around second language acquisition or that kind of thing. What sort of things, why would somebody set up a task like that? What reasons would there be for doing a task in that kind of way? What would be?
You're personalizing the activity and lower the affectivity filter that the students have towards the topic.
Okay, so personalization maybe. It might have an affective effect, yes?
Aspect of culture.
Maybe about culture, what do you mean by that?
Like when I knew he was from Saudi Arabia, I expect him to say, we don't use the computers in the classroom. And since I'm from Kuwait, we kind of understand like the culture basis. Not studying computers while I was in college, not studying computer technology, etc. So I kind of had that anticipated, expected response based on the aspect of culture.
Okay, interesting. All right, okay, yeah. Anything else?
I would say the different point of views, like between the students and the teacher. Usually they have really different point of views on using technology. Some of the technology for teachers are really exciting, like if you synchronize a meeting online, and sometimes it's, oh, this is a big thing, and but for students it's like regular stuff they do. They are online all the time. So sometimes it comes as an enforcement.
Okay, all right. So you're saying, in terms of the classroom practice, that this might seem to the teacher to be quite different, but for learners, it's actually part of what they do on a daily basis. That's interesting. Okay. What about other issues around language practice, and language development? Why might you do that? Yes, Margarita.
We have to collaborate and communicate to understand what's going on. So here we have to really use the language. We're using the language, putting it into practice, like asking questions to each other, giving information, expressing opinions.
Okay, so it's a task that involves people using language, and in fact, a certain amount of transformation as well, because you've got statements on there which you need to turn into questions as well. So there's another issue there that's important. Anything else? Any other kind of language?
Introducing terminology as well.
Yes, and maybe between you might, what might you do? You might negotiate the meaning, all right? So these are sort of the kind of second language acquisition sort of terms. So we've had affective factor coming out. We've had negotiation of meaning. What Margarita might refer to might be what Meryl Swain calls languaging, which is the thing that I'm particularly interested in. So that notion of getting people, the output hypothesis, so getting people to actually do things with language. In terms of the activity, I mean, you could argue at the moment this is hardly to do with technology at all, is it? This is a piece of paper, all right? So it's not about language technology. This is not a digital technology. This is an analog technology, isn't it? But that doesn't mean that it depends on your teaching context very much. You're talking about technology, but you're not actually using technology. What do you think the next phase of this lesson is going to be? What am I going to do now?
Dealing with technologies. Dealing with technology as such.
Yeah, but what am I actually going to do in the lesson? I've got you to talk about it. I've got you to fill in a questionnaire. What am I going to do with it as a teacher? What would be your expectations?
Generate data based on the responses you're going to get.
Yes, okay. So what we can do is we can actually, it depends on the actual system that you have. This is an online spreadsheet. This is part of what's now called Google Drive rather than Google Docs, and you can fill these in online. What I could have done, one of the other features that Google has is actually a form, so you can do really quite nice data collection using a Google form. We'll come back to that at a later stage. So let's have a look at what we might do as a teacher. So how might I conduct this lesson now? Would I necessarily fill this in at the front? What would I do potentially in terms of collecting my data? How would I do it as a teacher?
Tell us to log on.
Hmm?
Let's maybe have our username and password based on that. Then when you click input the data, it automatically goes up.
Yeah, it would be nice if that worked like that. It doesn't quite work like that, because if one person puts in this particular version, if I put something in there and then somebody else puts something in there, it overwrites it. So you have to think of, there's a word that people find a lot in the technology literature, the word affordance. And one of the things that you need to think about as you begin to use technology is what role is this going to play? How is it going to actually do the task that I want it to do? So what is its affordance? Now, it might have been better to do what you're suggesting, would have been to actually have had a form where you fill it in and that automatically generates a spreadsheet in the background. But this is one where it involves either the teacher, or maybe you might get one or two people in the class to log in and actually do the data collection for the teacher. So just do it quickly as a show of hands. How many people have access to a computer where they teach? Let's do it the other way around. How many people don't have it? So, all right, so that appears to be then, it's actually 21, all right? So we can put that in. About access to the internet. Anybody not got access to the internet where they teach? So, not access, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I've got 5 no's, which gives me, how many does that give me? 16, right, okay. Access to DVD. Anybody not got access to video or DVD playback facility? Nothing at all? Not at all. That's 2. How many does that give me who do then? 19, right, okay. So what am I doing here? I have access to an interactive whiteboard where I teach. How many people don't have access to an interactive whiteboard? Right, let's do it round the other way. How many people do have access to an interactive whiteboard? So just, how many people know what an interactive whiteboard is? What's an interactive whiteboard? Somebody like to, who's got one, describe it? What is it? Yes.
It's basically the same as a regular whiteboard, but with a projection, and instead of going back and forth to your computer, you can just touch it, and it's like a big tablet, and also you can write on it and edit your writing.
Yeah, if you like, it's like a big, these days you might describe it as a big smartphone, so you can actually interact with the physical screen, whereas here, if I touch this, it just waves about, whereas like with your smartphone, if you kind of tap on the screen, it will actually do stuff. An interactive whiteboard is like that. So it projects data onto the screen, and then you can do various things. You can write on it, you can do things. They were very popular for a little while. People spent a lot of money on them, but they're maybe if I spell it correctly, it actually works. So it's not Whiteboard, it's supposed to be Whiteboard there. So how many people have access to one in their classes? Now I've described it. How many people have got it? We had some tentative. 1, 2 people have interactive whiteboards. Okay, right. So again, that's 19. Right. So
I think it's 2 yes.
2 yes. Right. Okay. So it's round the other way, isn't it? So it's interesting that you get to a situation where a technology, if you look in the literature for a while, that technology was widely available. People talked a lot about it. There were lots of things, but now it seems to slowly, very rapidly, actually disappearing. What about access to a computer lab, a lab like this one? How many people can't take their students to a lab like this if they want to? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so 8 people don't have any access to a computer lab. Does that mean that you have access to technology in your classroom? Does that mean you have internet access and
Yes.
Computer doesn't work.
the computers don't work? All right. So in some situations it might be that there's no computing at all. In other situations, the classroom may have changed completely and we don't use this kind of space anymore. People are using tablets or laptops or whatever it happens to be. So what's the numbers on that? So 8 no's and how many yeses would that be?
13.
13, right? Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So there is a self-access facility where I teach. Again, something that was very common. How many people use self-access facilities? Do people understand what I mean by a self-access facility? No? Self-access facility is pretty much like a library, and where again you might have a small room with a number of bits of technology in it. It might not just be computers, it might be things like, well, in the past it might have been cassettes or DVD players, and students at the end of a class or set of classes would go there and do additional homework. So like a homework room, if you like, in a traditional sense. Again, there was a lot of literature for quite a long time on self-access facilities. People spent a long time talking about them and setting them up. But now self-access has moved online, so it's kind of moved, so you have a lot of virtual self-access. So how many people have used regularly a sort of self-access facility in their space? How many places where you work? So that's interesting. That really has changed, because self-access facilities were so nobody has one, so it's that way round, isn't it? So nobody's a yes, so 21 a no. That's quite interesting. What about smartphones? I've got all my students have smartphones. That's probably not a very good way of putting it, really, because there might be a situation where some people have it, some people don't. But how many people work in a situation where everybody has a smartphone? So 3, 4 people. And the big question is, are they allowed to use them in the class? So everybody has one, but are they actually allowed to use them? Because in many schools, particularly schools, maybe in higher education, it's a bit different.
But it depends on which students, like university, college level, or high school.
Yeah. So at higher levels, yes.
Yes.
At lower levels, no.
No.
Right. Okay. So that again is quite typical. So what's the maths on that? So 4 yeses.
7.
How many no's?
17.
17. Right. Okay. So how many people work in a situation where maybe 50% of the people in their classes have smartphones? A few more, but not many. What about phones in general? Who works in a situation where everybody has some form of phone in their pockets? Okay, that's interesting. All right. Okay, so there are online learning materials where I teach. How many people work in a situation where there's a VLE, virtual learning environment, where there are, if you like, it's like a virtual self-access centre? How many people work in a place where there is that? So 1, 2, 3. Okay, so not so many. So 3. And the numbers on that then would be? 18, okay. All right, so I'm not going to slavishly go through this because it'll take the best part of the day. But what can I then do with that? What would I then potentially do? Yeah, I can, all spreadsheets will allow you to create some kind of graph. And then what would I do as the class? What would I do as an extension of that?
Analyze the data.
Well, you could get the students to actually talk something about the data and say, look, you know, this, you could do some work. What language might you be practicing in doing that?
Unit language. Percentage.
Yeah, you could get into language talking about numbers, percentages, so it might be something like an EAP class of some kind where people have to talk about numbers and discuss percentages, look at different types of chart, you know, and that kind of thing. What else might?
Comparisons, describing tendencies.
Yeah, comparisons, sort of tendencies, speculative kind of language, all that sort of thing. So it's, again, I can do a session on this for people who are interested. We can look at how to create the graphs. It's very easy to do in both an online. Well, actually, what's interesting, of course, about Google tools is that they change on a regular basis. Whereas, about a year ago, you couldn't actually do charts in Google spreadsheets, but now you can. Last year, when I tried to do this, it wouldn't work. Now I can if I want to. So it's interesting that these tools change very rapidly over time. But of course, in something like Excel or one of the other kind of more commercial spreadsheets, that's possible. Okay, so and then after that, what might I do in terms of language activity? What will be the kind of end game of a class like this?
Written description.
Yes, a written description. So you might generate your graphs, and then at the end of it, you might actually get people to write an overall description, or you could get them to compare each other's graphs in pairs. So if they generated separate graphs, they could do an actual comparison themselves, so an initial bit of speaking and then some writing. So you could do that on paper, of course. There's no reason why it's an awful lot easier to do it with a bit of technology, because the graphs get produced, but you can actually do that on paper. So you can take an idea like that and you can actually do lots and lots of language activity. That's what people would refer to as a generic tool. All right? So this is not a tool that's designed for language teaching. And most of what we'll do in this class, we will look at EFL materials. We will look at some apps and some software that's specifically designed for language teaching, but the bulk of what we'll do actually will be the sorts of technologies that are available generically. And one of the reasons might be for doing that would be that you're also interested in a number of things, but one of the things that Mark Warschauer talks about in one of the articles that I'll refer you to, he talks about one of the earliest people who started talking about digital literacy. All right, have you come across that phrase, digital literacy? So that notion that we have lots of different literacies. You notice I was checking my maths literacy with you. So we've got literacy when people talk about things like reading and writing. People talk about literacy. Increasingly, people talk about learners' abilities to integrate and work with technology. So the ability to feel, to actually explore data. If, for example, if you look a bit further down here, I feel confident with using computer-mediated communication. Now that might imply a lot of different things. The fact that you actually understand the technology, the fact that you understand who might be at the other end of that piece of communication. So actually getting learners to understand in terms of safety, particularly if you're working with children, that the person who you're communicating with at the other end of that communication is actually sort of somebody similar to you. So if you're a child working with a child rather than a child working with an adult. So there are lots of issues around there that people need to be aware of, particularly if they're working with children. The other sorts of things, the other issue, this kind of thing, I feel confident in locating information I need on the World Wide Web. There's an assumption that people, because they've grown up, and again there's this phrase that you'll see a lot in the literature, digital native. Have you come across the notion of digital native? Right. Anybody like to tell me what a digital native is? Are you digital natives? Do you consider yourselves digital natives? No? Why not? Yeah, Felix.
I think that personally I don't call myself a digital native because from the literature they define a digital native as someone who grew up with technology and uses it on their daily basis. I'd say technology found me there. So,
okay.
While there are people growing with it, and those are even like the way I use it is not that confidently as someone like young kids. Sometimes in my classes I actually seek help from my students when like I'm using the computer videos in the classroom. I ask them to come and help because they know this thing better than I do.
All right. So that's what a digital native is. Somebody who kind of, you know, basically grew up in the digital age. So in the sense that, you know, you were born at a time when there was internet connectivity, and instead of getting for your first birthday as a child, you would get, you know, some toy. You would now be given a smartphone or a tablet to keep you quiet. But the assumption is that because they grow up digitally, because they can help the teacher do certain things, whizzy things in the classroom, that they actually understand everything about the digital world, that they realise that the data that's on Wikipedia is actually suspect in all sorts of ways because of the way that it changes, or not suspect depending on the way that you perceive those things. So the ability to actually look at material that's out there on the web and have some kind of critical perception of it. So just because somebody sort of seeing the difference between a newspaper article that writes about a topic and an academic article that writes about the topic, and having a sense that those things are different, that somebody who writes on a blog maybe has a particular angle on the topic, whereas maybe not. Maybe an academic article is more objective. I don't know. I wouldn't like to necessarily suggest that is always the case, because people in the academic world have an axe to grind as well.